Since the story hangs on the protagonist, you build your plot structure around the journey of the character, right? So figuring out your key structure steps leads both to building out your character and the plot organically at the same time. And let's take a look at what this is talking about. These are the 7 key steps of story structure. So you got weakness and need. That's the moral failings of your character. That's weakness. And need is what they need to grow into, the change that they need. Desire, what they're going after, what's going to be the thrust of the plot, as you will, whatever that saying is. Third one is opponent, is actually part of building the character, is basically what John Truby is saying. Figuring out your villain and how they're part of the conflict is part of developing your protagonist. And then there's plan, which is how they plan to achieve their desire. Battle is where the protagonist and antagonist go back and forth and they fight, and then it leads to the ultimate battle at the end that's going to decide the conflict for good. Self-revelation, this is what we think of as the dark moment, the change when the hero realizes the effects that the weakness was having, the immoral or unsuccessful actions that he was taking because of his weakness, why it wasn't working and what he needs to change. That's a self-revelation. And then at the end is the new equilibrium. We know that one. So this is building the plot and the character growth at the same time, out of the same place. It's going to link them intrinsically, and that's why he has structured it this way. Part of that is the opponent. You can't build a character who is going to fight and grow unless you also build what he's fighting against, right? That's the whole idea here. So I'm gonna say that the first part of the formula of creating a great villain is to create a great hero with a great conflict. You can't really get away from that. And so that's something to think about. He's not isolated as his own thing. It's always going to be connected to what this battle actually is, because you can come up with a cool idea for a villain, but if he's not the villain for this conflict, the story is just not going to work, right? What are the great conflicts of life? What are the great fundamental difficult conflicts that we have to grapple with? Because that's actually what's going to give your story roots. And what do they call them? Legs? Legs in the story. So here's a quote from the book that I wanted to read. Writers often mistakenly think of the opponent, also known as the antagonist, as the character who looks evil, sounds evil, or does evil things. And this way of looking at the opponent will prevent you from ever writing a good story. Instead, you must see the opponent structurally in terms of his function in the story. A true opponent not only wants to prevent the hero from achieving his desire, but is competing with the hero for the same goal. And if you look at a number of good stories, it often appears at first glance that the hero and the opponent are not competing for the same goal. But look again. See if you can spot what they are really fighting about. What is the core conflict? For example, in a detective story, it appears that the hero wants to catch the killer and the killer wants to get away. But what they are really fighting about is which version of reality everyone will believe. The Snow White and the Huntsman example, what they were fighting over is feminine power, the idea of what a woman is, what femininity is and should be. That was the fundamental conflict, but they didn't understand that. They just thought it was, oh, we're going to defeat the evil queen. They understood some part of it though, because they built out the character enough. That's why Queen Ravenna is so iconic, you know, is you don't see characters like her very often where she is this portrayal of negative femininity, dark femininity, I don't know what you would call it. Just don't see that terribly often. And you probably wouldn't see that today, because so many strong female characters are given traits of dark femininity and told, oh, you know, they're so powerful, they're so independent. It's either that or you know, they're made entirely masculine. All right, this is another quote from the book. Note that writers often talk about having a hero whose opponent is himself, and this is a mistake that will cause all kinds of structural problems. When we talk about a hero fighting himself, we are really referring to a weakness within the hero. So now we're getting into what an opponent is. It's not the conflict within the character. That's the weakness. Overcoming weakness, that's going to be the conflict in the character. The opponents stand for completely different values. And I've heard that idea before too, that the opponent is kind of like an extension of the conflict that's going on within the character. It's like, that's almost right. Almost. And we'll get into more about what that's actually supposed to look like, what the opponent is actually doing there. He's not an extension of the conflict within the character. The conflict within the character is overcoming weakness, whatever that weakness looks like. Before we get too much further, I did want to clarify how I'm using this terminology, and this is just how I'm using it. I don't think these are like set labels. This is the way that it has to be. This is just how I'm using it. So I'll use 3 different words. I'll use opponent, and antagonist, and villain. So an opponent is a character with values that are opposed to the protagonist. They're gonna be in conflict because they don't value the same things. They don't think the same things are important. They just don't see the world the same way. So this doesn't have to be an antagonist. It doesn't have to be a villain even. It could be someone who's even more mature and better than the protagonist. They're still going to be an opponent because they're in conflict, right? The antagonist is the main opponent who is designed to put the greatest pressure on the protagonist's weaknesses. So there's the connection to the inner conflict. Isn't about the inner conflict is about overcoming weakness. And so the antagonist doesn't have to be an extension of the same conflict within the character. They're just the character that can put the pressure on your protagonist that highlights his weakness or causes him to lean on his weakness so much that he can see it. You know, if your character's weakness is that he's a coward, for instance, the villain doesn't have to stand for fear. He's not like a manifestation of fear. He's just someone who can scare the protagonist. Does that make sense? And so because the protagonist struggles with cowardliness, he's going to run away. That's going to cause problems, and out of that he can see why he needs to grow out of cowardliness, because he either grows or he gets destroyed. That's the alternative. And that is the pressure that the antagonist, the main opponent, puts on your protagonist. I loved reading this book because it was like, oh, okay, I see. You can actually, because that was always my problem. I'm like, okay, I have a great idea for a character. What do you do with it? I guess I have to come up with other great ideas. How do you come up with great ideas? Like, seemed an impossible task to me. But actually understanding, oh, they're coming out of the same thing. They're connected. They're part of each other. This ecosystem of the story works together. I can pull questions and put boundaries around what my antagonist needs to be in order to be creative with it and actually figure that out. This is a quote from the book. I don't think I have it on the slide, but I'll read it. The single most important element of a great opponent is that he be necessary to a hero. And this has a very specific structural meaning. The main opponent is the one person in the world best able to attack the greatest weakness of the hero, and he should attack it relentlessly. The necessary opponent either forces the hero to overcome his weakness or destroys him. Right. Put another way, the necessary opponent makes it possible for the hero to grow. So that's his quote explaining kind of what I was just explaining. It's not that the villain is a manifestation of the inner conflict. It's that he puts pressure that highlights the inner conflict for the audience, but also for the character, that they can actually see the consequences of their weakness. That's the idea. All right, lastly on this, a villain is someone who knowingly causes harm to others. So I think antagonists can unknowingly cause harm either out of ignorance or lack of awareness. They're not aware of how their actions are affecting people. But a villain to me is someone who's motivated in a course of action and is determined to pursue it no matter the cost to anyone else. This is where you get people like people who seem to have altruistic goals, right? Thanos, in his own understanding, has an altruistic goal. He's trying to save the universe from overpopulation and overconsumption. And so he's determined that no matter how many people have to die, his cause, his understanding of the world is worth it, right? That makes him a villain. Someone who knowingly causes harm, who has counted the cost of what they want to do and is fine with it. I've never done this before, so in theory, I understand all of it. In theory, it seems clear to me on the page. But if you guys have any added thoughts for me, I'd love to hear them. I guess maybe here is where I could talk a little bit about genres. And I decided that for villains today, I'm going to be talking primarily about genres who have like mega iconic villains, and that's typically horror, action, thriller, and crime. Those tend to be the ones that have these villains that are so evil and so iconic that we remember them. And that's really because those are the genres that deal in physical conflict. The baseline of the conflict is physical, and so they tend to not be about the inner self, is I guess what I would say. If you guys have not heard of this book, I cannot recommend it enough. I haven't even finished reading it. Oh my gosh. So this is Anatomy of Story, John Truby's first book. This is his next book, and it just came out, I think, last year or a couple years ago. The Anatomy of Genres. Oh my goodness, this is so insightful, and I can't. Anyway, it outlines what the fundamentals of each genre is and which part of being human each one is fundamentally tackling. All that to say, I don't think that villains belong in every genre. Like, those main genres, horror, thriller, action, also myth, like that deals a lot in physical conflict and crime. Those are the ones that really require like a villain. If you're gonna tell a romance, like I said, if you're gonna tell a coming of age story, if you're gonna tell a comedy, you know, the villains, rather than being a specific character who is putting pressure on weakness, tend to be more of this idea of a system of characters who all contribute to the beliefs and system that the protagonist is trapped in how they treat each other and how they connect with one another. And so there's not like one villain that needs to be overcome. It's about the protagonist transcending this system that everyone is trapped in. And you see that in drama, you see that in romance, you see that in somewhat in comedy. Comedy can kind of fudge the lines on that one. You're not looking at villains, you're looking at systems of characters who are explaining, again, all the sides of this conflict, how they feed into each other, and how they keep everyone oppressed. So far what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I always say story and characters should be like a tapestry, pull on a thread and the whole thing should unravel. Right. You're giving you another book to read. Sorry. But I think especially if you're going to tackle a feature film or big project that is in one of those genres, or in any of the genres really, take a look at that book. You don't even have to read the whole thing because it covers, I think it's 14 different genres that he kind of covers. And so if you're just like, I need to look up the one genre that I'm like functioning in right now, you can do that. I have done that. I haven't read the whole thing yet, is why. That's why I have not read the whole thing yet, because I just keep looking up genres as I come across them.